Cool. Right. Hello. Hopefully everyone can hear / see me. Welcome to this webinar Wednesday, which will be a BVD focused talk by Boehringer about their new study on farm, which is really interesting. It's presented to us by Dr. Elsa Milnes. So I'm going to, in something slightly novel, try and present somebody else's screen, and hopefully everyone will be able to hear Elsa talking at the same time. So the Q&A is open, which is something we didn't achieve last week. So that's good, and it should mean people can comment. So if you can't see or hear anything, please let me know. Not that you'll hear me asking you to do that, but and we'll go from there. So take it away, Elsa.
Hello. Can you hear me all right? I just had a few technical glitches.
Can.
You can. Well, that's good. Well, we could talk to each other. That's fine.
Yeah.
I've just been trying to remove my background. I didn't realise that I had my smiley face background on, but you'll just have to bear with, because if I try and remove it, it seems to be trying to crash everything. Okay. So as you said, the focus of today's webinar is to discuss the advanced study, which is a recent publication produced by Boehringer, which is the culmination of probably several years' work. This next slide, Nat or Andy, who's doing it? So this is the publication. It's a +1 journal, and it's got a really snazzy title. It's comparing milk production in dairy cows vaccinated with Bovella and non-vaccinated dairy cows in the same herds, and these herds were endemically infected with BVD. And it's an open access journal, but we can provide the publication and send that on to you. So as you're probably aware, there's been an awful lot of investigation and work done on BVD, and this was a sort of new angle at looking at it. So most of the previous work has been on the impact of milk production, has really looked at in epidemics, outbreaks, and it tends to be, as we know, the reproductive consequences of the disease and the immunosuppression of the disease that tends to be the highlight when you're looking for the effects of BVD. However, there's been multiple papers which do discuss the impact of BVD on milk production, and some of these are just highlighted on the right hand side of the slide. So often or not, as I said, in epidemic situations, you will see that sudden loss of milk production. And that first paper is discussing 23% of a lower milk production over a 2-week period in one herd, and in another herd where they had seroconversion, they showed a 10% decrease, even though the actual outbreak seemed to be subclinical. There's also been an association with BVD being linked to higher rates of mastitis and higher cell counts in affected animals and in affected herds. And we've also looked as well at little anecdotal sort of bits and pieces, looking at lifetime yields in certain herds where we've had eradication of BVD. It's not published, but where they've looked at the lifetime milk production and they found an increase once you start eradicating BVD. But as I say, most of the time when we talk about BVD, drop in milk production is associated with the epidemic situation, but maybe not associated as a presenting sign. It seems to be one of those things. And often when cost benefits are done, they actually just say that there's zero effect when you're looking at an endemic herd. So it was a nice area to do some research. Next slide. So the study, the objective of the study was basically to focus on the effect of Bovella vaccination on the prevention of a hypothesized milk drop in BVD infected herds. And in addition, we also looked at reproductive performance based on the abortion and the stillbirth incidences, and also fertility cycles and embryonic mortality. Next slide. The study was done, it's a multicentric study. It was done across Europe in 3 European countries with 4 farms. And that was 2 farms in the UK. We had 1 farm in France and another farm in Italy. And the inclusion criteria was that these farms were infected with BVD. So they'd previously had BVD diagnosis, and they previously had to have a positive milk PCR within the 6 months prior to the commencement of the study. They also had to be commercial dairy farms with more than 100 cows, and they had to be able to be farms that would be have good records, and that included individual daily milk recording systems. So they had to have inline milk meters, and they had to be compliant in regards to the fact that they would be happy to record the disease and the treatments and the fertility data too. So we had some really, we had to work quite closely with those farms. So from our point of view, we had 2 farms in the UK, and we worked with them. We had 1 farm in the north of the country and 1 farm in the south. And although from a sort of an overview point of view, the study was, our main monitor was a vet who was independent from Boehringer. She oversaw all 4 farms. Within the actual regions, a Boehringer person had a site of each farm. And within those farms, it was their own vet that participated. So we had to have quite a lot of collaboration between the farmer, between the vet, and between the whole sort of study group or study gang. The duration of the study, again, we had to have farmers that were prepared to join in, was 365 days, and the study was performed under various good compliance and good clinical practice guidelines. Next slide. So the protocol was that the day before vaccination, the animals were all clinically inspected by their own vet, and also the monitor being present there as well. And if there was any animals that were unwell at all, then they would be excluded. On this day of the actual study day 0 was vaccination day, and then all animals which were all female, all over 10 months of age, so heifers over 10 months of age, lactating cows and dry cows, were divided into 2 groups based on their order of presentation, into a treatment group and into a control group. And the treatment group were given 2 mils of Bovella, and the control group were given nothing. So no placebo, just they weren't vaccinated. And from that point onwards, the dairy milk production of each of each of those cows was taken. So you can imagine you've got all year round calvers. We're having it's quite a bit of a logistical nightmare in terms of the data management. So you would be having all sorts of animals at different stages of lactation and obviously different stages of pregnancy. It was basically a set day for the vaccination, and we went in with that. And that meant that what we were looking at was just over 1,400 cows in total were represented in the study. A sample size calculation was done beforehand, and this actually wasn't the total number that we needed. We needed higher than that to get statistical significance, but we'll show you that we did still with a lower number. And that represented just over 1,500 lactations, because as you can imagine, because we just went for one point in time, all the animals would be at different stages of lactations, which means you might catch the tail end of one lactation for one animal and then pick up its second lactation in that 365-day window. During the study, the presence for BVD virus was monitored monthly through bulk milk PCR. And then all, as you would expect, all adverse events or PV cases were followed up. And we had an extra study protocol, an extra PV protocol in the UK. Next slide. So all that data was collected and the results came in. The lactation periods were divided into 3. So we had early, mid and late lactation. The early lactation period was up to 102 days, mid lactation 103 to 204, and then 205 to 305 for the late lactation. And there was an increase in milk production seen between the vaccinated and the non-vaccinated cattle on 3 of the 4 farms. So that was the 2 UK farms and the Italian farm as well. And you can see that the increase in lactation in litres per day varied from 0.6, that was the Italian farm, up to just 1.8 litres, which was one of the UK farms. And predominantly within early lactation. The second farm, which has got the greatest difference, was actually in mid lactation, but the increase, the statistically significant increase in the yield started during early lactation, so from day 30. And so what we're showing is that the cows in the herds that were infected with BVD and were vaccinated with Bovella, those animals produced more milk than their contemporaries, which were left unvaccinated. The compounded gain was estimated, well, was calculated for those statistically significant periods, and it was varied, as you can see, because we've got a difference almost of ×3 between the farms. 57.4 litres, which would be farm 3, up to 181.7 litres per cow per lactation. And the financial benefit just on that lactation was based on the average milk price across the European area of that time, and that was 20 to 63 euros per cow per lactation. As I said, we'd also recorded the reproductive data, and there was no differences found between abortion rates or prolonged interöstrus intervals between those that were vaccinated and those that weren't. Next slide. So really in discussion, the reduction of milk production due to both epidemic and endemic BVD has been reported before. But in this, we can show statistically that in herds which are using our systems, as we know, because they were done on our herds in the UK, that vaccinated animals vaccinated with Bovella produce more milk than those in the same herd that were left unvaccinated. That the dairy cows, we propose, are experiencing an energy deficit in that early lactation, and that's going to be associated with impaired function, and that the immune response will cost them energy, and that energy is being diverted, and that is where you're basically getting your gain in milk. And that the increased milk yield experienced by those that were Bovella vaccinated would likely to be due to the prevention of those immunosuppressive effects of BVD. So BVD results in additional stress on the immune system during that period when the animal's quite susceptible, so during that very early stage of lactation, and that it's competing effectively with the resources that would normally be used for milk production. Next slide. Just final summary points, really. I mean, I think what the study for us has shown that we often get asked questions about, can you use Bovella as a one, on one day, can you just go in and vaccinate it? And I think this adds to all the data that we had from pre-registration studies as well. That we've now, we've got a sort of 10 million doses, over 10 million doses sold in Europe. And this vaccine can be used on any day. You give it one day in all year round calving herds with no detriment, and that using it on the one day, again, it just actually backs up the data that we already have. But on top of that, that cows and herds that are endemically infected and vaccinated produce more milk than the non-vaccinated cows in the same herd, and that those differences occur in early lactation. That the BVD infection will be impacting on the milk yield without affecting the reproductive performance. So it's a hidden loss that you're seeing, which is something of interest. The fact that we didn't actually see any difference in reproductive performance, but remember, we were just looking at one time period, and maybe if we'd gone on to follow it through for a further 12 months, we may have seen a difference in reproductive performance itself. But despite that, even in those stages, we still were able to see a difference between those that were vaccinated and those that were not vaccinated, despite sitting in the same herd, undergoing the same husbandry systems. The findings of the study are additional considerations, especially when you're looking at cost-benefit analysis, when you're trying to look at eradication of BVD. And we know that with some of the schemes, when they did do the cost-benefit analysis, when they were putting their plans together to try and show the impact of cost benefit on a BVD eradication programme, milk loss was not included in that. So this is an additional consideration. And from that, the findings provide an additional motivator for farmers to adhere and to carry on vaccinating, rather than to think, well, I don't seem to be seeing BVD, maybe I should just let it drop. The findings of the study also add to the volume of evidence that we're always finding out more about diseases, and that add to that evidence and that interest about the impact and the consequences of BVD, not just in an epidemic situation, but in an endemic situation. And also the actual, if you get down to cellular level, it'll be interesting to look further at understanding the actual mechanisms involved with the impact of BVD infection on milk production.
Are there any questions? Actually, maybe time for questions, Andy.
Yes. So there are questions of public. I don't know if you can read them or not on the.
I can't see nothing on there.
Okay, I can read it. Anonymous tells us or asks us, how did you convince the farmers to join the study?
Yeah.
I.e. only vaccinate half the cows. Did you leave the PI animals in the herd to maintain virus presence?
That's a really good question, and actually that's probably why we didn't get statistical significance when it comes to numbers, because obviously what we had was we were trying to identify, say from the UK point of view, positive BVD herds, and obviously the suggestion then is if you've got a positive BVD herd, do a PI hunt and go for it. So we did have some farms that when we went to them, even though they weren't previously going to vaccinate and eradicate, having had that discussion, yes, they went ahead and did a PI hunt. But on these two farms, these were farms that fitted our criteria and they recorded and everything else, but they weren't motivated to get rid of their PI at that point. They weren't motivated to do the PI hunt, so we were able to use them, and it was felt ethically, you know, we had an ethical review that it was better to go ahead and vaccinate half the herd, and then with the UK herds, what we then did afterwards was we made sure we offered them a clear up of the herd, so we did a PI hunt at the end. So when you said, do we leave the PI animals in the herd, we didn't identify the PI animals. What we did do was we carried on monitoring the bulk milk PCR to see if we had virus in the herd. And one of those farms, Farm 2, one of the UK farms, it was positive on the first bulk tank PCR pre-study launch, and negative all the way through, which is interesting. But it was a herd that was tag and testing, so we knew that from those tag and test records pre-vaccination, that they still had positive calves coming through. But even in the herds where we looked at bulk tank PCR and monitored those, not all the way through were those herds positive. So if you know your PI is probably coming in and out, and as we all know, your PI is the one that's more likely to be lame, the one that's more likely to have mastitis. So that bulk tank wasn't always positive. So it's another indication that you can still do a bulk tank PCR and miss BVD in your herd.
Brilliant, thank you. I don't know, we haven't got any other questions at the moment.
It's okay.
So we'll maybe give it a second, but the next, hold on, no, we've got another question coming through from Anonymous. Has there ever been a similar study which comprised of 3 randomly assigned groups, Bovella, controls and product X?
No.
No. Excellent.
Something.
That's fairly straightforward. So the next part is to probably hand over to Matt, who's going to talk about a very exciting opportunity to win an award. So I'll hand you over. Have you got a presentation or anything, Matt, or do you just want?
It's just yeah, it's more slides on the end of here, Andy. So that's
okay.
That's fine.
Brilliant.
I shall crack on. But just thinking actually about that last question about whether or not the comparison was done with the killed vaccine. It's an interesting question, and one follow-on may be thinking that actually historically we may have thought that if you've got endemic BVD in a herd that you would get seroconversion throughout the herd and they would be protected, you know, so they would have antibodies and all these cows are seroconverted and that would provide protection. And despite that, there's still a benefit from live vaccination. So maybe it's not the comparison that was asked there, whether the killed vaccine had been used, but in these herds, you know, these cows had previously been exposed and did have antibodies, and yet still showed a benefit. So just throwing that in there, really. But if
one of the herds was actually previously vaccinated with an inactivated vaccine. Yeah.
But if there's any more questions, then yeah, just fire them in while we go through the next. So we've been working with Andy. I know BVD is still a big focus really throughout the UK. We've got eradication programs at various stages, and it's almost been going on so long really that we lose some of that drive and momentum. So we're keen to work with IVC really to give you something some new and different to get you thinking about it again, really. So just quite simply put down a few thoughts here, really. So what's our practice growth target? And this will obviously be specific to each practice, but ultimately, most practices will want to grow their BVD vaccination rate. Even in Scotland, Northern Ireland, vaccination rates have actually maintained quite well despite eradication programs, and certainly there may be potential to grow that. So understanding whether the practice would be looking to switch if they've got killed vaccine still going in, and people are feeling that actually the compliance really isn't being done properly. We'd actually like to switch those over to Bovella, then great. And then growing that market as well, primarily that would be more on the beef side. You may well be aware that we did a BVD survey. So Andy sent around some questions just to get some thoughts from yourselves really as to what you felt about BVD, what you felt about BVD vaccination rates in the practice. And that was very interesting. Even within practices, quite different perceptions of whether there was more to go out with vaccination rates. Some practices certainly said actually they'd really appreciate a bit more of a Bovella refresher, and this new work Elsa's presented can certainly it opens it up to everybody really. This is new information, new reasons to chat to our farmers about BVD. So we're certainly happy to do some more refreshers in a BVD clinical club format, virtually or otherwise, and we've done a few of those and they seem to work quite well. Generating BVD awareness through a BVD Zero Award initiative, that's something that Boehringer has done globally for a few years now actually, and actually doing something specific for IVC was something that there was enthusiasm for, so I'll talk more about that in a minute. If the practice feels we've got a high level of lapse, partial or non-vaccinators, and have access to the Vet Impress system, then we've been working with a number of practices with a BVD dashboard, and that just helps drill down into the data to pull up those farms that we need to be contacting. And then lastly, diagnostic support. It's simple stuff. It's doing check tests, which a lot of farms are already doing. It's maybe a bulk milk PCR, or maybe it's encouraging farmers to do some ear tagging, but we can certainly provide have discussions with you about that as well. So just to go into a bit more detail on the different aspects. So the clinical club sessions, now's a really good time of year to be doing it. Farmers are hopefully coming to us asking about BVD. We've got cows coming inside. We've got more potential for doing diagnostics, so looking at what our BVD status is. So if we want to support some extra knowledge transfer, we can do that. Get practices together perhaps, or even just practice by practice, and just make it a little bit more interactive, a little bit more fun. Sit down with a drink, have a bit of a quiz, or if we're not too over it with quizzes, but we can certainly do that. And we've got Elsa, Kath, all the sales team, Sinead as well can support with that. The BVD dashboard, it does depend on Vet Impress being installed, and it's a really nice way of drilling down and saying, actually, I thought they were vaccinating, but they haven't actually purchased vaccine in the past 12 months, or they're buying vaccine, but actually they've got 100 extra cows that they've not vaccinated. So, really, we need to have a conversation with that farmer and get them fully vaccinated. So, so we've worked with a few practices and happy to work with a few more on that. Bulk milk testing, as Elsa's highlighted, there are certainly challenges with bulk milk testing, whether it's antibody or for looking for virus. So if you've got herds that are not vaccinating so much for BVD, so actually their antibody levels may be a good indicator of whether they've got circulating infection, we can look at those. Or using a killed vaccine and strong suspicion of BVD, you can certainly look for PCR, look for virus there. But there are challenges. You know, chances are that these animals probably won't make it into the main milking herd. Evidence would suggest only about a quarter would make it, and also they may well not be milk going into the tank at the time of the test. But certainly something you can look at a case-by-case basis. And then lastly, the BVD Zero Award, just hopefully a good way of generating a bit of noise, a bit of momentum within IVC. So open to all vets. Really keen to get at least one entry per practice throughout IVC. And the judges would be David, Owen, and Colin Buchan. Colin, you may be aware, was a runner-up in the BVD Zero Award in 2018. Yeah, he's got a really interesting case. I was hoping he may be on this evening, but he's been on some CPD, and then he's on other duties, so he couldn't join us. But yeah, he's well qualified to help support this judging. Really, the case study material is what you'd be doing anyway. It's a bit of diagnostics. It's a bit of a write-up, some notes that you'd hopefully have down anyway. Historically, the UK has done really well with this global initiative, and I'm sure we can get some really good cases. The winner of this, and I'll talk about the timelines shortly. The winner will be getting £450. The runner-up. First runner-up 250, and the third 150, and so on down to the fifth. So yeah, it's worth putting pen to paper, so to speak, for the potential to get this. So please have a think. And if there's any cases you've seen in the past year or two that you can still dig out some notes for, or any that you come across, it could be really good to submit them. We're just looking for a Word document or convert into PDF. Don't go mad up to 8 pages, but 4 or 5 pages, that's fine, and that would include diagnostics. So on the front page, just clinical case title, name, practice, email address, and then judging criteria. Really, it's just the thoroughness of the submission and its information. A bit of the background context. Making sure that you've really drilled into the significance on the farm, emotionally, economically as well. A bit of an idea of the symptoms. Images are really good, possibly video material, that would be great. Lab data, bit of background data on the farm. Historically, we've had some really good economic analyses which have been used by the national eradication programs, actually, because of the quality of their submissions. So this is all really useful material for the wider industry. And if there is a farmer interview, again, that's really useful for social media, for example, as well. Timelines are submission before the end of the year, before the end of December. So you've got 3 months to have a think and get this done. Reviewing will be throughout January, with awards in February, and that probably fits with really the profile for IVC. A lot of the vaccination, a lot of the discussions will be happening really in springtime, so it should fit quite nicely in advance of that so deadline really. So if you've got any questions, either for these support services or for ELSA, then jump in. I think, Andy, you'll hopefully be sending these slides around, I think, and we can certainly provide contact details for you to get in touch if we've got any more questions. So that's it from me.
Brilliant. I've got an anonymous question from David Stockton. He wants to know, did you just get paid?
If we can all get together in February, then you get paid a nice dinner. Or maybe in January when we can discuss them over dinner. But speak to Boris.
Excellent. That's it. There's no other questions sort of waiting to be answered. So
cool.
I'll leave it there. So thank you very much, Elsa, for your pitch, and thank you very much, Matt, for the information on the award. And we shall see you all next week.
Sure. Good stuff.